All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Build. Did everybody go off and party last night or go coding last night? Which one? Okay. Who threw the coding party? Okay. Invite me tonight. I want to be with these guys over here. So it's pretty cool. I was walking around last night around 9 o'clock. We did the keynote stuff, and you don't often see people, especially in a night like this, out with their tablets kind of kicking away and that kind of stuff when the bars are open. So it's really great. I think we're all kind of excited, which is pretty cool. So in this session, what we're planning on doing is introducing you to the new stuff in Visual Studio 11. We scratched the surface a little bit in the keynote today. We've got tons of really great speakers. And so my job today is to give you a good kind of lap around look at what's inside of the product. We've got a bunch of breakout sessions that are coming up next. We've got speakers that can triple click on particular functionality, be going very deep on that. So hopefully you'll see some cool stuff that looks like something you want to go ahead and follow up on, and we'll kind of go from there. Now, to start off with the new version, we'll talk about Visual Studio 11. We're going to focus on a few different areas. We'll look a little bit more at Windows, the cloud, as well as the web, and we'll talk about ALM, and we'll kind of go in and do the recap. Hopefully you'll leave here with a good feeling about the new tooling that we've got and how you can kind of jump on board and start using the product. Now, every time we go ahead and plan a version of Visual Studio, there's several things that we need to balance. So just to give you a feeling for that, we start off on the top level, thinking about what kind of experiences do we want to enable. The sorts of experiences that you've already seen as part of the presentations this morning and yesterday as well. First of all, the user experience. So what kind of interfaces do we want to design? What kind of compelling applications can you build with the tools? How are we kind of keeping you relevant, modern, moving everything forward? Next, the developer experience. I spend a lot of time in the IDE myself. I think I want some cool productivity stuff. I'm constantly looking for ways that we can make sure that you're kind of right there in the zone, being able to get stuff done, having the tool help lead you through steps that you shouldn't have to spend a lot of time on MSDN, through a bulleted list. Let's see if we can help you. Let's go ahead and do that. And then finally, the team experience, because we don't really write code individually all the time. Of course, we have teams that we're working with. We want to make sure that experience is working very well. So balance out these three things with each new release. Now, the other thing that we have to do is make a set of promises of what you're going to get out of this. Well, first of all, I'll mention the productivity, how it can make you actually very efficient at writing code, getting stuff done, spend your time doing that. Next, also the integration, and you saw a bunch of this yesterday with the tools. So when you have to combine multiple pieces together, if we can make sure those things integrate well, the game demo we did this morning, with Azure in the front, devices, being able to use the same set of tools, expression designers, things like that, that integration is actually really powerful. And when you build a set of skills, now I can actually target a new form factor. You're all going to walk in able to write Metro-style UI applications, for example, because you've been using a lot of these techniques already, no matter which environment you came from. Last thing is platforms. And so we'll go through and look at what are the new platforms from Microsoft that are coming out. How can we make sure that when they come out, you have first-class tools? We just released the Mango tools for phone not too long ago, the new version of the Azure SDK, and then, of course, today, actually, we announced Visual Studio 11 that is ready for download and ready to go. And I had a gentleman ask me right before we started here about, does this thing only work on Windows 8? No, Visual Studio 11 actually runs on Windows 7, it works on server, it works on multiple platforms. Okay? So the Express version that came on your Windows 8 tablet device, that one requires Windows 8 to run because it's designed for building Windows 8 applications. But a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you here today, I'm going to be using a Windows 8 development machine, but just know that Visual Studio 11 works on those other environments as well. Because of course, if I'm building ASP.NET site or those sorts of things, I may want server. Take your pick. I may want to have a Windows 7 machine, that sort of thing. So just to clarify that. Now, if you look at the existing Visual Studio family that we have, and this is kind of our stadium diagram that we have for Visual Studio 2010, and what we're giving you out today, Team Foundation Server, new version of that, new version of Ultimate. This picture does not actually show all the Express queues, but we have the new Express queue, of course, that you've got in your laps right here. I wanted to point out a couple of new things that we've got. First of all, we have introduced, since we launched before, the Team Explorer Everywhere. And so if you do have anyone in your environment using the Java, I'm using Eclipse, I'm writing my code in Java. Sometimes it's common. You might be writing maybe a client front end. Maybe another one of your teams or your partner teams is actually writing a back end using WebSphere, take your pick, whatever system it is. Team Explorer Everywhere is actually designed to handle that. And so if you haven't seen that and that's your environment, go take a look at that. We have plugins for Eclipse, runs on the Mac, runs on Linux, so you can kind of make your whole team work. The thing we care about is your whole development team can collaborate through Team Foundation Server, and having some of the heterogeneous support is important for that. The second thing is, since we released 2010, we've also introduced the service. We have hosted TFS now ready, running up in the cloud. And we're going to start ramping that up and getting more and more people on it. Did everybody get the little package in your box? Okay, so like Satya mentioned, we got the signups are ready to go. You take that key on the back of the card and enter that, and you guys will be the first people on the planet to be able to go use that. So go give that a try, and it's kind of an exclusive thing. We're not actually going to hand out 20,000 of these. It's for attendees to get going. And then after we get going, take your feedback, we'll start ramping up from there. Now, for the final version of Visual Studio, one thing I want to set expectations on, we have not set the final SKU structure. And so we're going to finalize that. This is kind of the current version. With the download, we're giving you the Express SKU, Ultimate, and TFS. That's essentially the same thing we did in Visual Studio 2010 at this point, where we're really in preview mode, right? And then as Steven Sinofsky talked about yesterday, our next milestones will turn into beta and then RC and that kind of thing. I'll anticipate the question, when are you shipping beta? As Steven said yesterday, we're not giving a date for beta, so it'll be coming. What I really want, frankly, from you guys is go ahead and install that stuff, download it, give us a try, and I need your feedback. And that will very much directly apply, when we actually ship and get the product done, because we need it to work for you. Now, let's go ahead and cover build and kind of, again, go through this, and then we'll get you off to your breakout sessions in the rest of the week. We'll talk first about Windows, then we'll go into web and cloud and ALM, and wrap up and come back from there. So, first thing, let's look at building for Windows itself. Now, I can tell you that these apps are really exciting. They're pretty cool. You hopefully saw the big picture sessions yesterday where we walked through very in detail, talked about the UX, talked about the platform, showed a bunch of the tooling and what that kind of looks like. So the developer division, which I'm part of, we have been working incredibly closely with the Windows team since we started on the Windows 8 project and the Visual Studio 11 project in order to go build this. In fact, some of these applications here are actually built by my team, between us. That was a good way for us to vet, did the APIs work, do we like the tooling experience? It's the sort of thing that you feel like you'd be productive in. That kind of good back and forth with Windows is very good. And you're going to see a lot of that kind of theme show up in the support that we've shipped with the SDKs. So if I look at it, Visual Studio is the tool for building this stuff. And hopefully everybody saw all the mixture we've got. Really want to make sure you can use all your skill sets. So VB, C#, C++, HTML, and JavaScript. No matter which kind of environment you're used to, you're productive in, want to make sure that you can go build that. One thing we didn't talk a lot about at the keynote yesterday was desktop applications, and I'm going to show a little bit on that too, but that's obviously a very important part of the investment that we're making. So we certainly don't expect everyone to take existing apps that they've built and just kind of say, well, if it's not a Metro-style app, then it's not relevant. Well, absolutely not. I mean, you've got tons of investment there, and you need to be able to carry that forward. So I think we've done a good job on that. Another good sign of integration between developer division and Windows is we've also added some new support for any of the folks attending what would have been the WinHEC audience, which normally that conference would be now, if any of you guys are in that boat. We've added additional support between us and Windows to allow you to actually do some more productive work on Windows drivers, and so a lot of lower level stuff in there. So let's look a little bit at some of the features we've got. First of all, the designers are available. You've got them on your machines already. You've seen the kind of shared architecture that we've done with Expression. That was another kind of feature request. With 2010, we had a version of the XAML designer that ran in Visual Studio, which was a separate code base from Expression Blend. But of course, they're doing something similar, right? And so with this version, we've actually taken the Blend design engine, and that's the version that's actually running inside of VS. So we've just got one. It's kind of cool because there's some extra features in there for Blend, and it allows us to kind of share that code. Now, it does actually, honor inside of Visual Studio the Visual Studio kind of design, look and feel, those sort of tools. So it's the same engine underneath. You may notice a couple of differences on properties. In fact, there's some new features, but it's otherwise the shared bet on that. And of course, we introduced the HTML interactive design mode in that version as well. So a bunch of features in there, everything you need to go off and go build, the GUI applications. That same kind of designer developer workflow we talked about, we definitely have that inside of the product here. Now, if we move on to the next one, let's talk about Expression Blend for HTML. Again, a new version of that code base, and that one is it's an interesting piece of work, because when you think about it with JavaScript, if you were to open up a statically designed HTML page and try and render that, well, that kind of worked 15 years ago, right? Where we mostly just hard coding everything. But once you start actually writing a bunch of script, you start doing a bunch of rounded corners and injecting inner HTML and a bunch of stuff like that. Like, your application actually requires that code to run. And so this interactive mode is a big bet that we took and designed it so that when you're doing design in there, we're actually, you can click the little, the pointer with the little, kind of flare at the top, and that turns it in. We're actually running your app. Right? And we're using Windows to run it kind of in the background and remote it into the design surface. So when you're in that mode, you can actually click, the actions take place. I can pull up new divs, populate them, switch back into designer mode, and now you can do DOM inspector, look at CSS, set all those sort of things. That's a pretty cool piece of functionality. Otherwise, you're mostly in this, I got to edit, hit F5, try a bunch of stuff, edit, refresh, that kind of loop, which you can do, but it certainly is nice to have it directly in there. This particular version is built for the web applications that you can build for Metro style UI. So you can imagine us taking some of this technology in the future and applying it for more generic use in HTML. In fact, you saw this morning with Scott Guthrie that we've got some of that kind of technology where Scott was running the site remote, the inspector, and could actually do some of the same DOM exploration. So you should expect us to continue to add investments in HTML, DOM, design, all those other sort of things as well. We've also done some investments with JavaScript itself in the engine. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. And like I said, it's all kind of integrated. Now, if you look at the core IDE back in the productivity thing, we have integrated a whole bunch of stuff in here. We've got, for example, the simulator. I saw a lot of people that were, hey, this is cool, being able to both in Blend as well as Visual Studio try out different pixel sizes, screen sizes, rotations, everything else, so you can see what it looks like up front. That's a great way to go off and be able to test that. We've done all the packaging. You saw Antoine yesterday show a demo with the store menu. There was a bunch of items, just, keynotes are hard to go do, but, there's a bunch of items in there actually that you probably saw. We make it easy for you to sign up. We make it easier for you to do the packaging, the validation and everything else up front. We want to make sure that that's there too. And of course we have some that are just, like Antoine showed yesterday, very easy ways to find where you need to go to do the upload with the store and everything else itself. So, but everything's kind of integrated, and when you hit F5, you wouldn't believe the amount of stuff that has to happen under F5 with the developer licensing. So we spent a bunch of time with Windows figuring out how to make that kind of work, local packaging, local load, making sure the performance was good, those sorts of things as well. And then we've added a bunch of productivity, and we'll show off some of this stuff. So we'll look at it in code. All right, so I'm going to flip over to the demo machine here. Okay, there's more links up on my blog if you're looking for any pointers to those. The first thing I want to do is go pull up, and I am running on a Windows 8 machine right here. Like I said, this build is Ultimate and works on multiple sort of products. The application that I've got running here is just a little tic-tac-toe game. This is a XAML markup application, and we've got code under here that's written in Visual Basic. So I kind of got both of these on here. A few different things I want to do. First, I want to go ahead and expand out all the file information here. As I mentioned this morning, we've included all of the productivity power tools for the downloads. How many people are using those, out of curiosity? Awesome. We had 1 million downloads. I don't know about you. I don't actually use, if I install a new machine, I don't actually use Visual Studio anymore without downloading that stuff in there. It's really cool. So I think having it integrated is going to be nice. So this is one of our kind of Explorer views that's integrated in. I can see the entire overall system. As you know, I can go and get view additional information. And this is one of the themes that you're going to see with this version of Visual Studio. I mentioned about the developer productivity. I really want you to not have to go hunting and pecking all over the product to find stuff. Right, I mean, that just takes time away. You'll notice a couple of other things here too. One, you notice that there's only one row of toolbars up here, and there's less items on it. One of the things we found is that, you know how many commands are in Visual Studio? Any guesses? 300? 5,000? Get Marco Polo getting closer. 4,000. That's just us, okay? We have partners. So if you've installed a partner's, kind of a refactoring kind of solution or something like that, then they add their own in there as well. So it's nice and extensible, which is great. But at some point, wow, that's a lot of area in there, right? So we want to make sure that you're seeing what's there, not getting lost in some of the other options. So one thing is having fewer toolbars, having them on a single row, giving you the ability to have more of your screen real estate for what you're doing. Editors, designers, all the rest of that kind of stuff. That's something we really wanted to do in this release. Now, if I go back over here, I can actually, let's go hit sell on this, and I will go ahead and do my search. It gives us a nice index on all the parts of the product. As you can see, I can kind of get inside of a particular method and go look at that. This inline help is actually pretty nice because what you can also do is I can expand this. We have support for regular expressions as well. So I can do things like, player.star and go sort out and find different pieces. One of the things that didn't show here is we also have replace built in as well. So you can kind of do that if you have the scope. I can go click on the document, go figure out which section you want to be in, that kind of stuff. This is one of the good examples of, not taking you to a different place. So from a design perspective, if, look, it's in context of the editor I'm in. Don't go pop up another dialog over here and a bunch of options. And so you'll see several little touches like that, really designed for kind of productivity in here. I can change this and remove that, pull that back out, and of course, regular expressions on there. So I've got, some code in here. For this method. And in this particular case, this is a XAML VB application. And it's a little game. So when I'm done, I'd love to be able to come back and actually just say, hey, you won. What the heck does that look like? Well, let's pull out a little bit of code here, and it's code for the dialog. Now, in this case, one of the things you hopefully notice with the platform is that we're using a heavy use of asynchronous APIs in the WinRT API set. And that, of course, gives you nice power in interactive user mode and that sort of thing, so it's a very efficient sort of thing. Now, if I come in here, a couple of other things, I'm going to go click on dialog. You'll notice another thing here. We've actually added the common and all buttons on the bottom of IntelliSense. Common's kind of nice. What that tells is this is the functions you're most likely using, or we've detected you're using the most often. So don't make me show a huge interface. These are the ones you're probably going to look for. Of course, you can always go back and find the all and go hit everything you need. But again, another little touch there. If you look at the IntelliSense on here, we've got it's an awaitable method, which means that I can actually do the show. Now, if I were to set breakpoints on these two items, then that's great. But at this point, if I were to walk that through, that message box is going to fly, and it's asynchronous, and we go flying right through the code. Now, we have full control. We've got all the programming support that we need to be able to go back and write the await and kick off event listers. There's a bunch of that kind of stuff we can do. I think we'd agree in this case that's kind of overkill. I don't need to do that. It's more complicated than required. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the new await keyword. And Scott talked about this in the context of the server, but it also works in the clients. Any of this asynchronous programming patterns. And one of the things we did is we used a lot of our parallel work that we did in Visual Studio 2010 and .NET Framework 4. If you looked at the task libraries, PPL, TPL, all the rest of those, like that programming paradigm was then built. That's a great foundation. And using that plus now the compiler work that we've done in C# and VB, and there's a similar thing with promises in JavaScript, it gives you this kind of nice, clean sort of design here. If I go ahead and hit F5 on this, go ahead and run it. Now my application comes up, I can kind of play the game and go hit that. My breakpoint fires. And now if I just start doing an F10 through here, ordinarily I would go flying and falling right through. Of course, here we are going to block, hit this, click new game, and just fall right back through. So it makes it really very straightforward to write with these new APIs, but still have the power of asynchronous programming available for that. Now, let's go ahead and stop debugging this application. I want to show you one more thing on the designer. We'll pull back over here and look at the app manifest. Now, one of the things we did was spend a lot of time trying to figure out how can we have the tool help you build these apps in the best way possible. And so we've got the designer for the app manifest allows you to do that. So you've got the capabilities, so you can go through and author those contracts. Nice for the model. You kind of not want to turn on every single feature. I want it nice and secure and easy to get a hold of. But also declarations for the contracts. There's going to be some deep dives talking about how to author contracts. And the cool thing about that is inside of the designer, if you add, for example, like a search protocol and click add, will actually author the new forms and do the wire up for you, which you kind of expect. You can certainly go off and go do it manually, but being able to get the new designer form that's going to show up on the right side, like click in on the charms and click, search or share or take your pick, is really kind of cool. So it's another kind of productivity thing. And packaging. The other thing I'll point out here is how many people have written Windows Phone apps? Submitting up there. Awesome. So did you hit the point where you hit the page and it's like, oh shoot, I need like 8 pieces of art? I did, so which is great. I mean, and it's good, right? Because it's a rich experience. It gives me, the small tile, the peg tile, what goes up on the store, and what does that look like. But one of the things we wanted to start introducing into the tool, given the platforms have got the support, is let's make that easier for you. And so Windows Metro style applications have the same thing. So one of the things we did was include right in the designer the ability to go specify those, as well as the hint and some validation. Right? So now you can just go pick it. In this case, you can see that I picked a PNG for my logo, but I was off by a couple of pixels. So now I can just go back and go fix this. So this is a theme of basically saying, look, if there's a way for us to help you figure out where you may run into problems, let's not wait until you're 10 steps down and go, oh, geez, it's Friday afternoon, I'm supposed to have it submitted. It's like, let's let the tool kind of help you figure that stuff out. So this is another good example. The static analysis stuff, I'll show this in a little bit, but the static analysis work is another example, being able to pre-verify your applications and make sure from a submission process that it's clean and it's doing the right kind of stuff as another good example of that. Okay, cool. Now, what I want to do here is also show you, if you haven't been to the Visual Studio booth yet, we just looked at the Metro APIs, we have these nice little developer kits here. So if you, the kind of bribe here is if you come back over to the booth in the expo hall, go find the Visual Studio booth, and inside of that what you'll get is a nice little USB dongle for RJ45 and even a cable, so you're all set while on vacation if you don't have a cable ready to go. And those are basically designed so when you're doing the debugging, you can pop that right into your preview device over here in your USB slot. And so now when you're writing that really cool killer game, now you can cook up and cross debug from my Windows 8 dev machine here. I can hook it up into my preview machine. Now I can go test accelerometer and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So it's another kind of configuration. That would be under the remote section if you hit that. So I think we've got about 1,000 of these, so don't run out now, but we'll have plenty. But it's another good example of just making sure that you can do the entire experience for debugging, both local, simulator, as well as doing the kind of remote debugging situations so you can hit every combination that you're looking for. All right, so let's switch back over. And let's take a look at DirectX applications. So I showed a little bit of this stuff this morning, which is we want to start enabling you to be able to use and do some diagnostics around DirectX. If you're doing some of the more sophisticated gaming kind of scenarios, or even if you're using it for like simulations and other environments where that DirectX 3D kind of perf and experiences and manipulating cameras and everything, we've got that in there. We've also added new support with C++. Hopefully you saw the announcements for AMP, which is giving us the ability to get a lot of parallel code generation, new libraries, so again, increasing your performance and being able to take advantage of the hardware that you got on your system. Now, if you are doing some of the gaming kind of scenarios that that I've got my physics engine, I've got a bunch of other kind of engines that I'm using, but a lot of it is actually content management, right? I mean, it's the textures, it's the meshes, it's everything else that I've got, and you want to be able to have support for that. If you're also doing any kind of shader languages or anything like that, then having IntelliSense, debugging, those sort of things, very important for that. And it's what you kind of expect today. I have it with code. Why not be able to get that? And the graphical debugging between these two systems is pretty cool. So let's take a look at a couple more things. I showed you a good example of the Tankster app. Let's pull that one up today. I'm going to close down this solution. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull up our tank application that we did with the 3D piece. Now, one of the other things that we wanted to do, I showed you the find down here. The other thing, we had 4,000 commands, right? So you'll notice right up here at the top, we put in the quick access tool, the toolbar right up here. If I just hit a font, boom, we can go off and go search it. 4,000 commands makes it kind of easy, right? I mean, if I have, my favorite one is debug, because I often find myself finding that I've got too many breakpoints set, or I wish I could go get rid of those, and I know it's in there someplace. It's actually faster to just go type it in and go. That's lovely. Thank you. So let's go ahead and click fonts up here. One of the things I'll show you is I've written a ton of C++, and if you're a C++ person, you pretty particular about your syntax, right? You don't want us just kind of picking some stuff. I don't want lavender constants, good for you. That's a West Coast thing. East Coast guys do that. Take your pick, whatever it's going to look like. Yeah, East Coast represent there. So we've actually broken a ton of this stuff out, and so you have a whole bunch of different options. You can pick anything that you want for those, and then go ahead and share those as an example. So we continue to invest in a whole bunch of new C++ stuff, and of course we're going to keep investing in our .NET, JavaScript, et cetera. We want to make sure we've got a bunch of kind of cool things. Now let me pull up this tank FBX thing that we showed this morning, and let me kind of fill that back up. So we showed this morning having kind of the wireframe, those sort of pieces. I can pick a particular item. Again, the purpose is not necessarily to go off and design everything from scratch, but it's more so that you can kind of, as a developer, figure out, well, what's going wrong and how do I debug and do the diagnosis stuff. So there's a whole host of toolbars that are up here to help us out. So if I click the rotate here, I'm now seeing the degrees of access that I have within the model. So I can actually go manipulate that directly, pull things back and forth, do the rotate. So I got all 3 degrees, and that kind of helps me figure out how is the wireframe actually wired together. How are these components working with each other? What kind of relationships do they have? Now with this kind of turret exposed here, I can go over into the properties over here, and I can look at the basically the effects that are applied. If I go click ... that gives me another new view. Now if I scroll this back out, it takes a lot of steps to display that tank in the game, right? So what are those steps? Well, one of the things we've done is integrated a deep rendering stack. So this is the entire thing, shader languages, the models, everything coming together with one nice view. Because there's a bunch of different pieces in there that have to come together. And I kind of like this because it's a nice example of putting something right inside of the IDE, making it very easy for you to go figure this out. In this case, let me go grab this constant. That's a color constant. It's being used to apply the texture onto the tank and let us kind of getting the final rendered image. If I change that to a 1, now let me kind of scroll in here a little bit. Now the cool thing about this designer, you'll now notice that my tank, if you can see this, let's pull this over so you can see it a little better. My tank has kind of got a metallic blue. That's what the constant change did for us. Let's grab a little more real estate here. And if I pull this over, the cool thing is this is still an interactive display. So if I hold down my Alt key, I can actually still manipulate the tank in line. Pretty cool. Now, and if you look over here at the sphere, let's grab this guy and pull him in, because this is part of pulling that picture together. If I'm rotating the tank, you can see the sphere itself is also rotating. You can see the mountains and the cloud being reflected on the inside. And so that is part of the actual, a piece that's being pulled together. So when you combine that back with the thing we were showing this morning, which is, coming all the way from here's my frame, where's the problem, the pixel, all the way back to source code and being able to visualize all this stuff. And it's really easy because now I can start making some changes and I can, put these pieces together without having to go off and run a whole bunch of tools. Now, if I take this, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, as a developer though, one of the things I really want to do, let's click off of build. One of the things I really want to do is make sure that I've done a really high quality job on the code. So one of the things that we spent a bunch of time on in Visual Studio 11 is unit testing support. And we want to make sure that you've got the best possible thing. So we've added a new unit test explorer in here. Now in this case, we're in C++. Let's make sure that my build succeeded. Okay, great. So if I switch back over into my solutions mode here, you can see that I've got some test cases. Let me go ahead and rebuild those. And so I've built a set of test cases that are now part of my solution. And now we've built a unit test runner, and the unit test runner is designed to pretty much work across any of your workloads. So we're planning on supporting a bunch of open source plugins. We have some of the existing MS Test stuff. This is a new one that is designed for C++. And I spent a lot of time writing a lot of code, and I can tell you that my request to the team was I want to make sure that we can scale this thing up to a couple 100,000 test cases in one solution, and we've done that. So I don't know if you're going to do that, but it's going to work, because especially if you start doing TDD and that kind of stuff. So we've got linear scale on that. So just so you know, we spent a lot of time on that. Let me go ahead and do a run all on this. And so my applications run. I just got a couple here, just for demo purposes. If I double click on construct, you can see we do have our C++ code, my test cases. Now the important thing is this is all native C++. So there's not an extra thing in it. The runner is going to run the process. It doesn't care what you're running. But this is a new native C++ unit testing piece. And with this, you got essentially what you would expect. I can go in and do an assert. I can look and IntelliSense here, so I got all the sort of assert macros and things that are required. Now, of course, we've hooked this up in the same way with Team Build that we have with testing today, whether you've used the Test Product or Test Professional. But when these unit tests are part of this, when you kick off Team Build as part of TFS, we'll automatically build the product, but we'll also discover the test cases and run them for you. So if your build template has continuous integration, we can actually enforce check-ins and make sure that everything's passing before it goes through. This gets you back into a more kind of continuous improvement kind of cycle. Okay, so a bunch of cool stuff in there, both for DX as well as some of our testing and quality pieces. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here in the Windows section is driver development. And here's a good example, once again, of just how extensible Visual Studio is. Not only were we able to add all the Windows Metro style work, but the driver folks, and especially for you in WinHeck, if anybody's in that audience, we've added new support with the SDK that allows you to actually go build drivers inside of Visual Studio. And so the SDK, when you install it, you can do file new project and create a new driver, remote and deploy it, just like all your peers here can do today with websites and other sort of things as well, which is pretty cool. This is maybe our geek portion of this, but that's KD, the kernel debugger, running inside of Visual Studio, which I've wanted for 12 years. That's cool. Speaking as a former development manager for the CLR, and we had to do a whole bunch of stuff like that. My team was trained to go off into command line. The rest of them like, can't we just put it in the tool? So this is really cool, and it uses all the same kind of windows that we've already got set up, the same metaphors and everything else. The nice kind of remoting in there. So a lot of you may not have to drop into KD that often, but if you do, you kind of want to have the right set of tools in here. The other thing we've got in here, this is static analysis as well. And the static analysis is designed, and the way we've designed this for this release is we've built the Visual Studio integration around static analysis engines. And so those can get plugged in. So whenever you have a domain, we can plug that engine into it, kind of like the unit test runner. You've got unit tests. I can do different sorts of environments and run those, but collect it and then organize them. Same thing for the static analysis piece. This is actually going off and running driver validation. So if you're writing a kernel mode driver, I can get that. You guys will have also seen this if you use the validation support for your Windows Metro APIs. So when Antoine and Steven talked yesterday about it'd be good if I could actually run the scans and make sure that it works before I submit it, you're going to see this interface come up. Now, it could be on your C# code or whatever, but it'll run through the same interface, and it'll give you the kind of call stack, the kind of sequential data, the stuff you need to say, well, 10 frames later, this crashed because back here I did this, A equals this, X equals Y, and then boom. And that kind of support is now built in. So you got both, in this case, being shown off for the driver mode stuff. So yeah, it's pretty cool. We'll keep adding rules and everything else on top of it. I think you'll like that, but it gets you, again, the quality, moving that stuff upstream as much as possible is really important to us. All right. So, recap, we just saw a whole bunch of stuff around Windows, the Metro-style applications, VB, all the different languages and support. I can tell you when we built this, one of the things we did, we used kind of a scenario-focused engineering approach, just kind of letting you know how we were doing some of our own stuff internal. We're using a Scrum environment ourselves. We used SFE. We kind of walked through and said, hey, when we show up at Build, what would we like developers? They unwrap the box and they go, what are they going to want? What are those experiences? And we use that across all of these different languages and run times to make sure that you got a nice, consistent, sort of experience end to end, and it feels like a very complete sort of thing. So we got all that, hooked up and ready to go. We've got the DirectX stuff that's in here is new, the Windows drivers pieces. There's tons of great sessions. We pulled out 3 right here that will give you a little bit of background. So if you're looking for kind of a pointer where to go next and you saw something in there that looks kind of cool, like to go in and double click it, here's a good place to kind of go next for that. Now, next I want to talk about building for cloud and the web. And there's a bunch of new stuff that we showed this morning. Scott Guthrie did a great job covering some of the new work that's kind of coming out with Azure. The latest SDK is available. You can get a hold of that. You saw a demo with Service Bus. We can do all the profiling and advanced diagnostics work. We already had IntelliTrace for pre-production for Visual Studio 11. We're also enabling IntelliTrace for production mode which means if you're having, and again, you'll use monitoring, you'll use the normal sort of things first to find and diagnose problems, but if you get to those kind of hard to reach problems in the code, some places aren't quite working, I want you to have the industrial strength tools, be able to turn those on, make sure that they scale, make sure that they work, so we've got that ready to go. So we've got web roles, we've got adding deployment projects. We showed a couple of those this morning. That Crunch stuff was pretty cool. I've been looking for that for a while, so I'm glad to see that and a bunch of integration. So all of this stuff works across all of our Windows, Azure, and building applications, and for the web roles, and in support, and of course for the on-prem piece. The next thing we've been making a bunch of investments in, hopefully you've really gotten the feeling today that we're really trying to help you across all of these technologies. A new area we've invested a lot in is HTML5. So if you've been doing HTML and JavaScript, then you're going to have a whole bunch of brand new functionality. Frankly, some stuff that I haven't seen other vendors hit yet. So I expect to see this area kind of heat up. We'll continue to work with Xaml. We'll continue to work with our web designers for the reach mode, those sort of things as well. But we want to produce, best of breed for things like CSS, HTML, all the rest of those sort of things. We also want to give you more control over your code and make it easier for you to do the most common sort of tasks. And I'm going to show you how to go do that. Hit the clicker, there we go. So with HTML and CSS support, a few IDE enhancements. First, we've added some snippet support in there, some extraction for controls will show that. A lot of new IntelliSense stuff. So if you're in the editor and you really want to be able to kind of whip through that and add a bunch of stuff and make it go really fast, we want to make sure that that works really, really well. And some IntelliSense, support for writing code faster. With the JavaScript tools, we've done a whole bunch of performance work on this. So our JavaScript editor, our IntelliSense in there, that's actually using our JavaScript engine that we ship with IE9 and with IE10 now. So we actually do run it in process. So whenever you're typing and going in, because of course it's a dynamically discoverable language, and so we kind of need to run it to take a look and see what you've got. And we do some smart syntax checking and things like that to figure out the context you're in to hopefully give you a much better, kind of feeling for what the right answers are supposed to be. Going back to definitions, being able to do the normal kind of editing, that sort of work. So some of the stuff that you already would expect you're using perhaps with .NET languages or C++ today, let's go make sure that those are working well for you also. Finally, diagnostics pieces. When you're building everything and you're trying to figure out, well, what's going on in my code? Why isn't it working? I think the DOM Explorer is really cool. We took, my team also owns the F12 tools for Internet Explorer. We took some of that same code, we moved it into Visual Studio as well, so now you can use it in these other contexts, and we can enable that. I can do the tracing and figure out exactly where did this come from? How do the styles get applied? Where did the layout come from? Et cetera. The console is also very helpful because, of course, it's a dynamic environment. I should be able to manipulate it. I can use the REPL loop in there to type in code and snippets, update things, run everything through, and be able to, again, get much faster in my kind of turnaround for everything. Also with extending and improving ASP.NET, lots of improvements that we've got. I think Scott kind of scratched the surface today for what we're doing with ASP.NET. First, a few new things. The mobile work, and Scott showed off a device kind of scenario today. One, we can automatically detect the phone. That's going to make it easier for as you're authoring to be able to target multiple devices. Also with optimized views and pages, so you can kind of figure out the difference between those form factors and get the right kind of layout. Because let's face it, it's kind of a pain in the butt to keep writing all of this code all the time. jQuery mobile support, which is kind of becoming a very popular standard for people to kind of go pick up. Of course, we want you to be able to use whatever you'd like to use. That's totally up to you. But we've picked in a few of these that are kind of arriving, and we're also trying to help and contribute back in those cases so that as these things evolve, we can make them really productive. The NuGet support makes it easy for you to find new libraries and also stitch them together in your project. I think that's really cool. And of course, that's not just for mobile as shown here, but there's some new libraries being included, making sure that wires up correctly. We've got new support for ECMAScript 5, and as well as some improved editing experiences for jQuery, being able to pull those in. Also the controls and being able to line up like the data control. This is another place where the team is working with the community on that and trying to help build that out, make sure we got good support for that. New stuff on the web platform itself, so MVC support, pre-built Ajax, making sure you've got the kind of client-side paging, sorting. I mean, you want to be able to get your apps out there as quickly as possible. And also the debug while running, the kind of preview mode that we talked about, SEO capabilities. So essentially, it's a pretty wide spread of functionality that's now built in to the product. So basically any aspect of writing a site, pulling it together, your client side, HTML and JavaScript you might be doing, lots of support built in there. The page inspector Scott showed off this morning, that was pretty cool, wasn't it? See that? This was the live piece where we're actually running the site on the back end, and you're able to actually go in and click on the DOM, figure out what it was, get the call stack, or the stack that applied the styles onto the page and pulled all the right kind of stuff together. I think that's going to be, like I said, a really good example of how we can make the interactive mode inside of the IDE, your source code and your assets, and pull all those things back together. It really makes it simple, because otherwise, man, you're doing a lot of manual kind of work to go figure out how these things kind of cascaded back together. So that's a cool new feature that Scott showed off. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these new features. I'm going to switch back over to my demo machine, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up the web application here. All right, so I've got a nice little web app. Let's go back over to the solution here. I'm going to hit Control F5. And so you can see I've just got a very straightforward web application. If I click on CSS 3 on my tab over here, I've got some content in here, very straightforward sort of stuff. Let's take a look at some of the interesting features in here. I'll leave the site up and running. So one of the things I've got is in the editor, I've got a background color that's up here. I don't know about the one we have, it's kind of bland. So let me kind of go grab this particular set of text here and comment that out. And I'm going to go hit spacebar on this. I've got inline color picking, which is pretty cool. So again, good example, right in the editor. Don't need to go to another sort of spot. So let's pick maybe, that looks pretty good. I'm going to save this, hit F5, refresh. And I got this nice, it's almost a Visual Studio kind of gray. I kind of like that. We can also go back, and the shortcut for this is Control-J. So if I hit Control-J, I can also expand this out. It's actually a full color picker. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So I can go pick maybe this orange, kind of thing in here. That looks good. Save that guy. Hit F5, and let's right here. And of course, what you'd basically expect. Let's hit the last one on here. We'll go to Control-J. I can also go in, of course, and go grab the eyedropper here, and maybe let's really get some Visual Studio color, like Visual Studio. Hit that guy, and you can see the whole 9 yards. So it's making it really easy, right inside of the editor. Don't have to go off to another designer, wait for a dialogue to come up. Some cool things like that. Very straightforward. Let's go ahead and next look in here. And one of the things that people are doing a lot of is trying to figure out how to make kind of richer looking APIs or the interfaces, excuse me. So I got my page right here. This is the overall page layout for CSS. And one of the things I might like to be able to do is go ahead and add rounded corners to my app, make it look a little bit more modern. So if I hit Control-K and then X, I can grab up snippets here. And you can see I have a border radius snippet built in for CSS. Hit enter on that. That's going to actually, hit 15 pixel, and boom. So it's basically going through and adding the markup required for multiple browsers and making sure the right kind of syntax is in the CSS. And I can do that very quickly right inside of the editor. If I come back over and hit F5, you can see, well, I now have rounded corners. Well, at least on the page. You can see I'm still having some problems with some of the other divs on here. So let's go take a look at the header, and we'll do Control-KX again. And we'll pick border radius. I'm going to make that 15 pixel. Hit enter on that. And you notice that the editor at that point will actually insert all three. I do one setting and it actually replicates through, and so I can get all of those in there. So it makes it a lot easier in the editing. It's very quick, just a few keystrokes to go do that. Okay, now we're getting very close. The last thing we're missing is kind of the div on the menu here. Now, another interesting, easy feature to use, if I go select this, looks like I've got the markup already. In CSS, we wanted to have the full editing experience. I can just click uncomment, pull that back out, hit my F5, and now I've got complete rounded corners. So very, very simple to get that done. Built right into the editor, didn't have to change a bunch of views. If you're cranking out a bunch of CSS and HTML, that's going to make it easier. Now, a few other things we've done. If I go into default.aspx and grab this after the image, maybe I want to go ahead and do a header 3. We're doing all of our normal matching stuff. Hello build, and I can hit this guy. I can get my text up here. That's great. We want the easy editing and just help me out here. So if I just make this, maybe that wasn't large enough. Let's do an H2. I get auto brace matching. Yeah. the less I have to hit the arrow key, the happier I am, right? So we want a bunch of that kind of stuff. So that's cool. There's a bunch of productivity sort of fixes and things in here. Now let's go ahead and pull up some JavaScript that's inside of a page here. This is geolocation. Very typical, of course, with all the sensors that I got available. I want to make that available. Let's look a little bit at the JavaScript piece. So if I go ahead and do an else, we've added some support for easy editing. I can go in here and say, let's grab this Navigator instance that I have. And now we're kicking into a IntelliSense. Of course, we're inside of an embedded script block, but we're actually going off and figuring out the code, how you're using it, what it kind of looks like. We've also got a nice kind of fuzzy matching on here. So if I don't know exactly the name, I'm just going to type in GL, geolocation pops up, right? I can go back and hit any kind of combination like that, and it makes it really easy for me to find that. Again, very quickly trying to figure out what's in there. Maybe I don't have to memorize the entire thing. If I add this in here, I think we're going to do, let's do this as on post, position ready, and we'll do on error, so I can put in my error handler. Okay. Get this guy in here. Okay, so that's great. So now I have my code, so I can handle the kind of, the other case here on my else clause. Now the other thing we want to be able to do, right-click on position ready, go to definition, and go back and go find that code. So very straightforward to go use, and a lot of you may be like in .NET, it's like, well, duh, I want to be able to do that. Remember, it's JavaScript, right? And so everything's dynamic. We have to actually be going through and looking at the entire parse tree in the current state, because of course there's a lot of ability to override. So there's actually a whole bunch of smarts being pushed in there for dynamic language to be able to go figure out what that looks like. But then it helps me write kind of faster control and things like that as well. Let me show you one last feature here. I'll go back into this model binder in here. Now, it's not uncommon for me to create a page, get the layout, get the binding, looks kind of cool, kind of happy with that. But the thing is, I want to use this elsewhere. So what am I going to do? Again, I don't want to have to do a bunch of editing, so I'm going to grab the form view here. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to say extract to user control. And we're going to call this person control. And so what we've done here is it's going to pull it back out, turn it into an ACX, and put that into my project. And so now I just have this one piece of code here, but now everything has been hoisted and wired up correctly. So now if I have another page that wants to go use that, just select it, turn it into a control and extract it. Now I can use it from wherever else that I'd like to have inside of the project. Okay, cool. Now let's switch back over. Now, quick recap on that. So we talked a lot about HTML, JavaScript, ASP.NET, a few sessions that I can pull out here that if you're interested in that area, you're trying to figure out more details on what we just saw, and a whole host of other things. Several sessions ASP.NET with some new editing features in here, the mobile pieces, so if you're targeting multiple devices from your kind of service code or your website code that you're writing, great one for that, and then some Azure information if you're trying to get up and running on that. Now, I want to wrap back around with the application lifecycle management, our team development work that we're doing. The first thing I want to say is, team development's, it's basically for everyone. I showed this morning, we have a small team working 4 or 5 of us and pulling those things together. If you look at the Agile Manifesto, I mean, how many people are using Scrum in Agile practices of some sort? That's nearly every hand. That's kind of what I'm expecting. And we're using exactly the same kind of thing. It's increased our productivity. So we wanted to actually really go in and figure out how could we make that a first-class experience. You can see the Agile Manifesto in here, and following this kind of a process, I think is very intuitive, and it leads to a good amount of team interaction and quality and all the rest of that. Now, if you look at what we've been doing here, I want to also start pointing to the way that I see services development and the client development moving, and that's this entire cycle kind of coming closer and closer together. And so if you think about it, when we're writing software, how are we doing that? Well, all of us here are probably developers, and we're working more on the left-hand side. And on here, I'm starting off with my product backlog, figuring out what that looks like. I'm planning sprints and doing Scrum and things like that as well. And hopefully at the end, I've created a really high quality version of the product. But there certainly are issues that I have to deal with. So there's misunderstood requirements. This is what you asked for, but here's what I built. What I usually say is, how many times have you built exactly what your customer asked for, but not what they wanted? You ever had that problem? No, never happened to Never happened to you. But that happens all the time. And so we've added some requirements management support. You can do mock-ups. You can test it with your customer, your user, make sure that that works. Conflicting priorities is another good example. How do I actually go in? My priorities change. I actually have to go do something else I wasn't expecting to. I'm in the sprint. Your VP walks in your office and I gotta have a toolbar right up over here, guys. It's like, okay, that's an interruption. You got those problems. So that's all on the development side. But once I get this thing done, I still have to go get it out there for production, right? So once I get this out here, I've got an operations backlog. It's going to start running. It's going to start doing stuff. What's going to happen over there? We're going to hit problems. It's going to wind up in problems. We're going to get monitoring and those sort of pieces coming back. And so if you look at the kind of developer operations lifecycle, this kind of what we're really trying to do is go look at this thing and say, how can I go pull this together? Anytime there's a gap or a handoff or the opportunity for something to get screwed up or messed up or causing the issues, I want those things working closer together. And so earlier this year, we brought in some System Center support that you can go use, which is great for if you're using System Center already. But what you'll see us do is continue to add a lot of features in here, continuous integration, getting us up to continuous deployment, these sort of things as well. And you expect to see us continue to add that. So with Visual Studio 11, I showed off this morning the web-based project management tools, IntelliTrace for the production environment. We've also got some new stuff in the My Work. We've got a lot of views in TFS today, and kind of like the other parts of the product, I like to pull those together so that My Work basically says, what am I doing today? Which tasks do I have? What issues are top of mind? What tasks and user stories am I working on? Don't make me go through a bunch of dialogues. Code clone this morning, pretty cool. I love that. Unit testing, hooked up to build. Kind of how do we make this cycle work? Really well. So let's flip back over. We'll do one last demo here. And I'll shut down my machine here, and let's go ahead and close down this. Nope, we don't need to change that. And I'll go launch a new version of Visual Studio. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the StockViewer app. Now, let me give you some context. The StockViewer application. This is a .NET project written in Windows Forms in 2005. Okay? So as a project team, we pulled it forward to Visual Studio 2008. And so that's the last time we've kind of done any of the project stuff. And I now see these new tools, and I want to go pull that forward. So I'm going to go ahead and open this inside of Visual Studio 11. I'm going to convert it into the project system that I've got here. Let's let that run, go get everything pulled over. So now I've got my application here. Now, one of the things I want to do here is let's go ahead and pull this up so you can kind of see what it looks like. Okay, so Windows Forms with the designer. Now I'm on a Windows 8 machine. I'm just going to go ahead and click Control F5. We'll go ahead and launch the application itself. Now, this app's going to go ahead and run. Now, as you notice, with the Windows 8, I'm actually not running this as a desktop application, right? So it's not an immersive application, but all of my code is going to work. Right now, it's going off. It found data from when it was written, 2004, 2005, and that kind of space in here. The key point I want to make here is that with Windows 8, that's the cool thing, right? I mean, many of us have got code that we're maintaining, we're building, we're adding new projects. The notion I'm just going to come in one day, take all that code, and just toss it out and say, oh, good, I can try something new. It's like, well, this is a great application that you probably would benefit from being pulled into the Metro style UI. You can imagine some total touch gestures on this. This would be a killer app for that. But nonetheless, if I need an update for my existing customer base, I'm not just going to go do that next week, right? So we really wanted to make sure that you got first-class support for your existing investments, and that's going to work very well. Now, one other thing I will tell you about this is that we have introduced, you may have had this problem before too, you're the cool kid on your floor, you've got this new Visual Studio 11. That's how I roll. You see my Nike? Nice. Okay, here's my developer tablet, Visual Studio 11. How you doing? So you're the cool kid. The problem is when you convert that project, what happens to the folks down the hallway? They try and open your project. Oh, damn, you guys are using the new things. Guys, I got work to go do. We've introduced project compatibility between VS 2010 and 11. Okay? So once I now make some changes into this application, I can still check the thing in, and I can turn around and open it up in the 2010 project down the hall. Now, if I add this into source control, I'll just go ahead and add this real quick. And I am actually hooked up to hosted TFS. So we're actually hooked up into the cloud here. I'm going to pull this back up. I've added it in. Let's go into the Team Explorer. Let me look at the pending changes. This is an example of how we're trying to pull together the organizational pieces. So you see everything here, not 4 different tabs to go hit. In this case, I can say, upgraded to VS 11, and go ahead and do my check-in. Sure, go ahead and check in those 72 items. So you can see this display here. This is really giving you a lot of your data directly. So I don't have to go off to another one. I've got the stuff that I want. You can see my work items are in here. So that's pulling in, like, here's the task that you're working on and what that is, not another display. I can kind of use this as kind of like my heads-up display on what does my life look like, today, this week. What kind of stuff do we need to go do? I've got all of this, excluded changes, all the rest of that kind of stuff. Okay, so my app is kind of done. Focus. There you go. Okay, thank you. No files checked in due to conflicting. Okay, we've been editing for a while, which is kind of cool. Let's go check that back out. But I mean, you can see that the heads-up display and everything else is designed to make this super simple for you. If I go off over here, okay, I see it looks like we did get our checking going. So I'm going to expand this guy back out. Let me go back and do my search here. Let's look for a draw vertical. And in draw vertical, here's a method I have in here. This is in C#. We'll close this down. And I got a piece of code right here. Maybe I'll uncomment this, put this back in. Now, one of the things that we want to be able to do is be able to pull back and look at that. So you can see, again, here's my included changes. I can see exactly what this looks like. I can shelve it. I can do that work. I can also click more up here and request review. And if I do request review, I'm now setting up to have a flow for code review. And so if you've got, we had East Coast representing, I got West Coast, we're working together. I'm going to enter myself just to make this kind of simple so you can see it. But I can add this in here and basically say, hey, I've got this, I want to take a look at it. I can go back and click a submit on that. And now it's going to actually enter it into the system, be able to put that request back in. Now things can kind of pop back, and now I can actually start going through and doing annotations and interesting sort of stuff. So here's, the work that was being done, what is the shelf set, the request has kind of come through, and you can see, all that kind of content. Now, with that, the shelf set is going to get packaged up, it's going to get sent over. I can now start looking at it, figuring out what the deltas are. I can comment, I can annotate, I can add all that back, send it back for code review, make sure you got all the right kind of stuff in there, and that our overall status is good. So again, what we want to do is try and pull the teams together. So it's about being able to kind of increase that effectiveness of the workflow across the team and the pieces we're doing. Now, we've got a whole bunch of interesting sessions coming up that we'll talk in more detail about what that looks like. In particular, these sessions talk about ALM and the walkthrough piece, more web-based tooling pieces in here. Again, we're doing a bunch of stuff right inside of the browser. So one of the things you saw me do this morning at the keynote, I pretty much stayed inside of Internet Explorer or whatever browser you're using, but I can also turn around in Visual Studio and hook it back up. Okay, so that's all of our experiences and promises that we have. I want to call attention to what I'd love you to go do. One, we've made these things generally available. Go download those bits. Go have fun with them. I want to see your feedback. Go sign up for Hosted TFS. I've been using it actually for 6 months. It's one of the perks of my job. I get to play with the new hardware. And I love that kind of stuff. All that. It's pretty cool. Send us your feedback on that. The last thing I would do is we had a couple of major sessions that are coming up that would probably be interesting for you. First of all, Anders Heilsberg is going to be doing the future of C# and Visual Basic. He's got some really killer stuff. You think async is cool, he's going to show you some new nuances on that, and also some cooler things after that. Cameron Skinner, who is going to do a lap around for all the ALM work. So if you're looking at our support for ALM, all the rest of that is in there. If you're a .NET developer and you want to figure out what's new in the .NET framework, Joshua Goodman is going to cover what's new in there and get that content going. And if you're also a C++ developer, then Herb Sutter, one of our architects, is going to go through and talk about writing this kind of modern C++, how we've evolved it, and how we're bringing that language forward into the future. So with that, I'm going to say enjoy build, enjoy the sessions. Thank you very much.